I'd be from the Philippines and you'd be there in the States. That's pretty cool.
It's wild, isn't it? Every time I'm going to go to open our PowerPoint here, if I can get it to work.
Okay.
It's going to get there eventually. There we go. Now I just got to move this over here. Should be coming up. There it is. Nice. All right. So if you're watching this on YouTube, sorry for the inconvenience. This is week 7, I believe, of our study. So this is it's good. It's coming along, and we're starting to get into some different modern day, if you will, thoughts on charity and working with the marginalized. And so that's where we're going to get today. So and this is just a reminder for anybody that might not be able to make it to the live class. I did get a couple of emails today that said that they were working or had other commitments. And so if you do watch this, please just send an email to me and let me know that you watched it so I can count you. So we can count you as present and know that you're doing it.
Yeah, look. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. So week 7, reminder, next week is spring break. So just want to put that out there. So we won't meet next week on the 15th. Wow. Did you have something you were going to say, Ace?
No, I just wanted to say I saw Cheryl and Annette come in there. So I just wanted to say hi. Hi, guys.
Hi there.
Hey.
Hope y'all are doing well.
Doing well.
Yeah, doing good here in the Philippines. Hope you are.
Good.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you guys.
Hi.
And hear you.
Yeah, nice to hear you.
Nice. Well, as we kind of go into this, I just this isn't necessarily a recap, but this is just kind of the broader themes that we've looked at. We talked about how we are the marginalized due to our sin. You know, our sin marginalized us from God. We've also seen how God cares about the marginalized. He in fact set up laws that would look after the poor, the fatherless, the widow, and the foreigner. We also learned that other people are also going to fit into these, besides just the poor, the fatherless, the widow, and the foreigner. We used the example of the leper, in situations like that. And then also, we did that session on Jonah and the people of Nineveh, and kind of talked about maybe our modern day Ninevites. And so those have been some interesting conversation and good thoughts that everybody has been given on there. Has there been anything that, you know, has stood out the most to you? Or I don't know if that's the best way to word that, but has there been a topic that we've covered or a discussion that we had that so far has kind of really stood out to you, that made you think a little bit? I've enjoyed all of the responses that we've gotten on the essay questions, and those have been really good. You've provided some really good thoughts, and so I appreciate those.
Right. You know, Daniel, I guess one thing that has maybe kind of giving me some, or is giving me wisdom, is when you talked about dignity. We talked about that, there was that law not to glean. And it made me think for a minute, because, before, when I was new here to this country, and I do recognize that a lot of our people here in the Philippines are in need because we're not as fortunate. And, I would be quick to hand out, thinking it's the right thing to do. But I do also see that some people don't use that handout very well, or they might actually use it to, in a way, kind of destroy themselves a little bit, Yeah. So for me, it was just an interesting topic.
Very good. Yeah, and as after spring break, we're gonna hit hard on that theme, because there are some things that I was doing in terms of providing handouts and things like that, because I thought that was the best way to help people, that I've since come to believe or understand, just based on research and personal experience, that there are probably better ways that could be handled. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I know each context is going to be a little different. Here in the U.S. in the States, things are going to be a different setting than they're going to be for you over the Philippines. But I think a lot of it can be cross-cultural. We all have a basic human desire for dignity. We all have that, and I believe that God set us up for that. And work is actually work and earning our living is actually part of God's plan that He set in place, and it's a good plan. And so, those people that sound harsh, like, well, why don't they just go get a job? There's some truth to that. Now there are some things that we might have to confront or help or walk alongside a person with. There might be even a hard issue with the person that's saying it, but there's a lot of truth to it. And so, that idea of dignity has been one that has stuck with me for years, and that we have to be about restoring dignity in people. So I appreciate that. Kirk shared this thought with me a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was just good to kind of introduce it here. It's not, and it doesn't necessarily go with what we're going to talk about today, but it just was a good thought that I thought we should at least acknowledge. It's by Richard Rohr, and he says, the marginalized have a big head start over the rest of us, because God's privileged and often hidden position is the bottom or the margin of things. It's never the top and never the center. And then he says, I myself need to pray for one humiliation a day. There is a very privileged way of knowing, and it comes to those who are in any way marginalized, expelled, excluded, disabled, or in any minority position. They all know something that you cannot know in any other way. So there's a lot that's in there that we could discuss, but that idea of the marginalized being somewhat in a head start or in a good position, because they're understanding the humility that one needs to approach Christ. I thought was compelling. Richard Rohr, that's in his book Things Hidden. So in 1984, there was a preacher, and his name was Charles Landreth, and he wanted to try to understand the plight of the poor. And so in his city of Dallas, he posed as a homeless man. And for a month, he lived out on the streets, and he panhandled. He stayed in shelters. He went through the soup kitchen lines, and really sought to try to understand homelessness. Now, most of us, if we've experienced homelessness, it might not be to that extent, or we aren't in a position where we would want to try this, right? So here are some things that we come to look at when it comes to homelessness. Basically, there are five levels of homelessness. And whenever we go through these, the first two you're going to look at, you're probably going to go, but that's not homeless. All right. And so I'm going to acknowledge that. And this isn't, and I don't know everybody's living situation or anything. So this is not to downgrade anyone. Okay. This is just an educational tool right here. So 5 levels of homelessness. And these first two are where some might have some disagreement, but the first one being those who live in government funded projects. Okay. And we're going to talk about why, if I can find my notes that I wrote on this. So government funded projects, for a little while, most of these started coming about in the 1950s, at least here in the US. And they are 1 to 4 bedroom apartments, usually arranged kind of in a barrack style where there's a courtyard in the middle. It's interesting, nearly every city that I've been into, whenever you go and you look at the projects, the layout is pretty much the same in most of them. That's changing now because now a lot of them are so dilapidated that they're being torn down and rebuilt. But here's where it comes from, why I say this is a level of homelessness. This is, there's usually inferior maintenance that has been done on them. And it's because, like here in my town, there's 1 or 2 maintenance guys for all of the housing projects, for all of Muskogee Housing Authority. Okay, so we have Port City Acres, we have Honor Heights Towers, we got Whispering Pines, we've got one that we refer to as 6th Street Hill that I can't remember the technical name of it. And those are just a few, and there's a couple of more. And there's basically 3 people that take care of all of those. And each unit has multiple apartments, if you will. And so they try, and they're always working. So it's not a knock on the maintenance people. It's just that there's only so much money to pay a maintenance crew. And so oftentimes they end up being inferior places to live. They're not ideal. Something's always broken. They're not safe a lot of times. A lot of the population that's there, they can be labeled dispirited, if you will. Discouraged. And actually, until very recently, and still is so the case in a lot of cities, the easiest way for a single mother with children to get into housing was for her to declare herself homeless. Because if you were a mother and you didn't have a husband or a man living with you, and you had children, it would bump you towards the top of the list. And the waiting list for these places are oftentimes a couple of years. And so it's a unique sense in that we say that they're homeless because there's a kitchen, there's a bathroom, there's even a door that locks usually. And you have a mailbox that's supposed to be your own. But very few people try to live there by choice, right? If you ask most of the people, if you say, hey, would you rather go live in a neighborhood and in a house? Most that I've come across will say, yes, I would. And so while they have a roof and a key to their door, there's no real sense of ownership of this. You're at a moment's notice. If you have a disagreement with management, with your neighbor, somebody has a problem with you, a lot of times a person can be thrown out in just a moment's notice. Or, if you were late on your rent, you can go, which is true for most every place. But also inspections, they'll have housing inspections where you have to meet a certain criteria. And those aren't necessarily bad. We see the point of those, But if they come on a bad day, because maybe you've had a rough day and you've got a lot of bad news, and on that particular day, I know a young lady, she was having just a rough time, a rough week. She had problems with her car. Her car broke down, so she was late getting her kids to school. She was late getting to work. Then she had to figure out how to pick up her kids from school and get back home. And while she knew that her inspection was going to be the next day, and she worked through the night without any sleep, trying to clean the place because it had been a stressful week. And it turns out that she missed a spot. And so she got a notice, we're coming back in 10 days. And if this isn't taken care of and it doesn't meet our criteria, you have to leave. And so there's this sense where there's no real ownership. You have a roof, but no roots. You've got a house, but no home, so to speak. So that's the first category, those who live in government-funded projects. The second level of homelessness is those who live in the rundown substandard housing around the projects. Now, a lot of times families or a person owns these houses. And so in that way, it might seem as though they have a place and we wouldn't consider them of the homeless, but oftentimes because of the neighborhood being what it is, all right, and it becomes a less than desirable location. So it's not like you have a high resale value on your home. Oftentimes the places are falling apart. A lot of the people that are living there are struggling financially because these are typically areas where there's a high poverty rate. There's also typically, due to just the plight of the circumstance that people are facing, oftentimes we see high addiction rates saturated in those neighborhoods. We often will also see high crime rates at times. And so even though they own this house, in some ways that ownership is like being tied to it, because they're not able to save enough to advance themselves. Whereas a person who's actually living in the government funding project, if the opportunity hits just right, they can save money, because those are typically on a sliding scale as far as your payment. So a person living in a government funded project can have an opportunity probably more easily than those that are living in the substandard housing that they own to get out of the neighborhood and to better themselves. And I always struggle with conversations like this because it can feel and sound and come across as being very judgmental, and that's not the intention. So I want to establish that. All right, these are this is actually from a book called Up Close and Personal. It's right here, and it is called Up Close and Personal: Embracing the Poor. These are men that are, at the time this was written, it's a few years old now, were in Memphis, Tennessee. And Memphis at that time was one of the poorest, if not the poorest, city in the United States. And they were working in the zip code that was considered the poorest zip code in all of the United States. And so that's where this is coming from. And I like this. This is actually, I'm going to read something from their book. It says, with no money for repairs, oftentimes these people will never be able to escape their house. It becomes like a prison, keeping them permanently in the underclass. The first two categories of these people that are often in our inner city neighborhoods may not be physically homeless, but they could easily become homeless. A robbery, a fire, or trouble with the law can change everything overnight. They live with the sense that nothing is really permanent, often on the edge of homelessness. So that's these first two categories. Any questions so far on that? All right. Number 3 are the boarding house residents. All right. So some cities will have these, they're boarding houses. They're often old hotels that have been converted into boarding houses where you pay by the night or by the week. Usually you're paying quite an expensive amount as well. What happens where I work at the mission that I work at is people will get tired of having a curfew because we have some rules set. You have to attend so many classes. There's some requirements. You have to attend some classes, some chapels, go to certain meetings, and then there's a curfew. And then we also we do breathalyzers and things because a lot of our people are coming and they're trying to get out of addiction and they're seeking a place to be sober. And so we do breathalyzers and drug tests and all of that because we don't want a person to come in smelling of alcohol and they go and they sit by a person that has just overcome alcohol and it sets them off. And so they lose their sobriety. So oftentimes people will say, listen, I don't like these rules, and they'll leave. And they end up and they stay at a really rundown hotel here in town. And they say, oh, it's pretty reasonable. And I'll ask them how much it is. And they'll say, well, it's just $225 a week. That's a whole lot of money, $225 a week. Or they might say, well, it's $50 a night, or it's $40 a night. And they're not setting themselves up for anything successful because they're not staying at a hotel where it's like, wow, this is a good place, where I get my breakfast taken care of and my bills are paid. Because some people choose that, and that's fine. But they're going to a place that is typically the ownership doesn't care because you're just a paycheck, right? And so boarding house residents are the third category. The fourth category are those who conduct their affairs at night. There are usually, if you go into a typical city of any size, there are typically the homeless of the day and the homeless of the night. And so that's the fourth category. And then the fifth one is the transients. Those are the folks that will typically stay at your shelters. They might go from shelter to shelter, or they might move to a different neighborhood to find a different shelter and try to get whatever resources are offered there before they come back. And so those are kind of 5 levels of homelessness, if you will. And so just want to leave that. If there's any questions or any concerns about that, if there's one that you think, one or two that you're like, well, I wouldn't consider that on that scale, we can discuss that. All right. And let's see here. The next one I want to talk about is some facts regarding the homeless. Okay, most homeless have plenty to eat. All right, and so providing food is not necessarily the solution to homelessness. Even providing a house isn't always the solution, because the issue has to do with the heart and not the stomach. We often get, why don't we just build a whole bunch of tiny houses in a neighborhood and throw all the homeless in there? What do you see might be an issue with that? Well, from one that works with the homeless every day, if there's not some type of education process that takes place to where we change and we just learn disciplines, then putting everybody that was in a homeless shelter or in tent cities and putting them in a bunch of tiny houses, it solves the solution of a roof over your head, but it doesn't solve the greater needs. And so it's not so much an issue of, well, let's just give them a house, or let's give them a room, or let's give them food. There's something deeper that needs to take place. Believe it or not, some people do enjoy being homeless or like being homeless. I think there's a few of them, but one comes to my mind. Here in my neighborhood, he tells me all the time, I don't want a place. I love the freedom of being home. I'm not tied to anything. I go where I want, when I want. I'm free from, I don't have to, I'm not and this is how he describes it. He says, I'm not a slave to the light company. I'm not a slave to the water company. I'm not a slave to the 9 to 5. I'm just out here living my life. And every once in a while, when it gets extremely, extremely cold, or, we're in Oklahoma, so we have tornadoes. So whenever he thinks that there's going to be a tornado or something, then he'll go and he'll seek some sort of shelter for that night. But he's if you ask him, he just says, I like this lifestyle. So as strange as that might sound to most of us, that is the case for some people. Most homeless people are frightened. I said that one time, and a person goes, no, well, don't you mean frightening? Don't you mean that they frighten others? And I wrote it correctly. Most are frightened, right? While there's this boldness at times when somebody's coming and they're asking for something and they're seeking to fulfill a need that they perceive that they have. Now, there might appear to be a certain boldness, but deep down, whenever you talk to some people, they are scared. And so, and I know oftentimes we are afraid as well, because we don't understand maybe a homeless person. And so understand that they're feeling that same thing. They're feeling those same fears. The fears that we have are the exact same fears that they're experiencing. The world of the homeless is small. And what I mean by that is, I know a guy, he goes to the library for set hours. He goes there when they open and leaves when they close. So they're open 8 to 6 here because it's a smaller town. On 2 nights a week, they're open 8 to 9. So he goes in from 8 in the morning and he stays there till 9 in the evening. And then he goes and he finds the only time he'll leave is whenever he knows that a place is serving a meal. So he'll leave and he'll walk over and get the meal, and then he'll come back to the library. He knows when a specific church does showers, and so he'll walk over there and he might get a shower. But that's really it. And so the world can seem small to some homeless. And then 1 in 3, at least here in the U.S., I don't have the worldwide statistics, but I would imagine it could be across the board. 1 in 3 have mental illness of some sort. And so there's this sense that just men and women are misunderstood is really what it is. And so when I'm doing these and I know I'm saying it in a way that sounds kind of matter-of-factly, like, well, here's the facts, and those are presented to say the subject is deep, and it's going to take us figuring out how we're going to relate to others. How are we going to relate to people? Well, it helps to know that they're just as scared of me as I am of them. That helps. It helps to know that some just enjoy being homeless. Because this other guy, I've tried to get him a place. Hey, why don't you go here? They'll help you get a place, and we'll get you all set up. And he doesn't want that. He doesn't like it. And we now have a good enough relationship where he says, I don't want that. So if that's all you have to offer that to someone else. And so now we just sit and have a cup of coffee and talk about God. Like that's our conversations now. Because he's still a man and he's still worth respect. And so we sit and we have a cup of coffee. I listen to a story. He listens to mine. We talk about God. We talk about life and what we're doing, and then that's the extent. And that's all he needs. That's all he wants. It also helps
So
to
Dan, oh, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, this guy that you're talking about now, what would be the difference between um, him choosing homelessness than someone that we call a nomad? Is that kind of the same?
By nomad, are you meaning like one that kind of wanders around and
Yeah.
okay. Um, yeah, it can be. Typically uh like this individual, he stays put in his spot. He's got like 3 spots that he goes to, and he doesn't try to leave town to find other people or anything like that. He stays put. Whereas others would go kind of town to town,
I see.
stay there for a while, and it might be an extended while, and then move on to the next place. Whenever
Okay.
like, I've talked to everybody here and gotten all I can out of it. So,
Hey, Daniel, question on your coffee conversations with this guy. Do you see that it's helpful for him? Is there maybe any fruit that
yeah,
you?
it goes back honestly to that sort of dignity thing. Whenever I stop and I'm having a conversation with him, he knows that I'm seeing him as a human being, and so we sit together. It used to be awkward, it used to, and part of that awkwardness was my position. So he saw me kind of as this person that's going to decide if you get to come in here when it's cold or not, kind of a thing. But really, since we've gotten to know each other, our conversations I feel are fruitful. He understands, and he understands that somebody's taking their time to get to know him, to meet with him, and to see him. And that's really, you ever see people when you go to a busy intersection, if somebody's holding up a sign, whether they are or they're not, but you see the people that look the other way, like automatic, or they'll start looking at their radio. They don't want to make eye contact with someone. He loves that I'll make eye contact with them. That I look them in the eye and I go, hey, been thinking of you. Been praying for you. Anything you want to talk about? Sometimes it looks like, nope, nothing. And so I'll go, okay, then I'll talk. And so I'll say, hey, I was, I spilled coffee on my lap the other day. It was really, really hot. And then I had to go home and change because I was on my way to work. And then he'll laugh a little bit. He goes, that's funny. I wish I'd have been there. And it's like this, that just that moment. I mean, it's a goofy conversation, but then it allows to deeper conversations. And then we're able to move into, so just tell me, did you have a family? Where'd you grow up? How long have you been in this town? Have you always kind of stayed and lived this type of life? Or did you once have a career? What happened? And then he's able to express, and he gives a little more information each time. And then the conversation always ends with, I love you and God loves you. And if you need anything, you tell me. And sometimes you bring him hot chocolate on a cold day, he'll tear up a little bit and he'll go, thank you, Jesus follower. And so those are powerful moments that we can have. But it takes getting to know him and realizing he's afraid of me at the beginning, just like I was afraid of him, because I didn't know how to respond. Because oftentimes I'll try to come up to somebody and they'll just start yelling, right? Why are they yelling? Well, 1 in 3 have a mental illness. The number's higher, a little bit higher than that now. So it's probably like 1.25 because these are old statistics. And in 2015, 1 in 5, is that right? No, 50%, I'm sorry. In 2015, that's where I'm getting the 1 in 5, 15. In 2015, 55% of all homeless people had severe addiction issues. And that number's increased just because of the state of the world that we live in now. And so homelessness has increased here in the States. The latest numbers say that 583,000 people are homeless, like genuine homeless. That's not our 5 categories. That's on the streets or in shelters homeless. And of that number, they suspect that it's probably closer to 75% have addiction issues. It's closer to 65% have mental illness. And so that's a lot that we have to face. That's a lot that people are going through. And so it helps to know that, because then I realize that it's not just, they're not upset with me. It's a person that's just struggling with life. And so they've been burned a lot, or whether real or perceived, they've been extremely hurt by people like me. And so now I'm able to approach that and not take it quite so personal when I get rejected, or when I'm like, hey, here's my card, let's talk, and they throw it away right in front of me or spit on it or whatever it is, because that's happened. So that's why we're bringing these up, and I don't mean to kind of do it like in this matter-of-fact kind of way, like, well, here's the stats, but really to say this helps us understand, and if we have a better understanding, then we can provide some dignity, because we realize they're not attacking ours, they're defending their own. They're not attacking us as a person, they're defending themselves as a person, to say, do you see me? Or do you just see the baggy clothes? Do you just see the sign? Do you just see the hair that isn't washed and combed just right? Is that all you see, or do you see me? And so that's important. Poverty. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it reminded me. Several years back, I had a conversation with someone from El Paso who would tell me about a pastor, or I think it was a couple of them, who would go to this homeless guy. He was an alcoholic, so they would take him beer, but before they allowed him to drink, they would, they would speak to them. He would kind of try to give them a message, and, I'm not going to argue with any methodology. I think for me, in my opinion, it's probably a good thing, at least he's getting the word, but interestingly, how do you handle, offenses like people spitting on your card or yelling at you? How do you overcome that so that maybe it doesn't affect you, or that you can continue to do, good works,
Yeah. It's difficult. And really it depends on how full my cup is, if I can use that analogy. I ran across an email that I wrote about 4 years ago to the staff at the mission that I worked in, and it was called God's Sweet Tea. All right. And it's so here in Oklahoma, we like our sweet tea, right? And so I was talking about how I go to a restaurant and I get my cup and I put the ice in it, and then I stick it there, and I'm trying to get the sweet tea to come out. And I love it and I enjoy it. And then I go back for more, and I get about halfway, and then I realize that it's empty. So what do? I take it and I turn it right? Because I'm trying to get that last little bit, and it might be enough to almost fill my cup. But then I go back and it's completely dry. And so what I've got to do for myself is I've got to make sure that I'm spending time with God, that I'm allowing myself to be filled with his love, with his purpose, and that what I'm pouring out is from him. Because if I get to that point where I'm tired and I'm hungry and I'm irritable, then when those situations arise, I'm a lot more likely to not respond well, to not respond properly, because I've become empty. And so first off, I have to make sure that I'm full, that I'm doing the things that are necessary in my faith walk with God, and then just to understand his love for me. And if I'm understanding his love for me, then I'm better able to share that love with others. So I've got to allow him to fill me with his spirit and his love and his grace and his mercy, so that I can pour that out to others. And so that's the first thing. And then the second is just kind of understanding where a person's coming from, right? Understanding the way I was taught to handle stress is different than how other people were taught to handle stress, or were not taught at all. And so my very first day, we had like this mud storm. It was weird. Like it just rained like mud, basically. And I guess there was a lot of dust in the air, and it was really dry. And then whenever that rain finally came, it just basically turned into mud. And so I've got this black car, and it's got all this mud all over it, all this brown mud and dirt. And my very first day there, they're like, "Hey, Daniel, your car is dirty." And they wrote it. Well, some of the sand grains scratched that car. So, and it was brand new. Like I just bought it like the month before, brand new off the lot. And it was like my first time I ever bought a new car in my life. I always drove cars that were like 15, 20 years old. And I was so proud of this car. Still, they scratched the paint whenever they wrote that. So I'm still driving this car now, 5 years later, 6 years later, and it still says, "Hey, Daniel, your car is dirty," and scratched paint. All right. So my initial response was to be upset, because I think I know who did it. I'm like, boy, he's going to have a hard time now. Like, that was the revenge factor in me. But I went home and was like upset about it. And I went through the car wash and tried to take it off. And then that's whenever I realized that it was a scratch. At first it was funny. And then I'm like, oh man, they actually scratched the paint of my car. And it says this saying on it, like forever now, until I decide I want to paint it. And it was though, now God didn't speak audibly or anything like that. But it was as though in my spirit, it was like, it's just a car. It's just a tool to get you to places, written on by a person who has nothing. And you're upset about it. And so it became like this, it was a pride issue that I was having. And so I've got to understand the other person's perspective. So if I come in, like for example, anytime we have a chapel speaker come, for some reason, they always like to say, "I've been right where you are." And that really hurts our people, because they don't know you, and they don't know that you're right where they are. And if you ever have been, they say, "Well, you're not here now." And so understanding from the other person's perspective is vitally important. And so I try to come from the other person's perspective, first making sure that I'm where I need to be spiritually and emotionally, that if I'm ever at this point where I'm feeling mean-spirited, that I excuse myself. And I have this agreement, I don't know if it's still in play, but it is for me, that if I'm if I'm feeling as though I'm not in a right place spiritually and emotionally and mentally, then I don't need to go to work that day. And not because I want to not do my job, but because my job deals with people in crisis, that are in crisis 24/7, that if I'm not in a place mentally where I can be patient and understanding, then it's probably best if I don't have those conversations. And sometimes they'll say you need to come anyway, and that's fine. But I've got to make myself aware that I'm at that spot. And I might even say, hey, you know what? I want to talk to you and I love to hear your story, but I'm having a rough day. And in order to give you the best possible service that you deserve as a man or a woman, then we're going to have to talk later on. Give me a little time to pray and read and refresh, and then let's talk. And not everybody has that. Or not everybody can do that. I get it. And I can't do that often. So I want to make sure that I'm in that spot where I'm the best that I can be for the situation at hand. See, when it comes to poverty, it's complex, right? There's no just one cause of poverty or anything like that. It's caused by a lot of different factors. But really, the most important thing is that it has to do with broken relationships. A broken relationship with God, we talked about that in the very first class, that we as humanity have a broken relationship with God. And so that's why Jesus had to come and bridge that gap. A broken relationship with ourselves. And we're going to talk more about it in the next slide. I got like a picture illustration for us. Broken relationship with others and with the rest of creation. So what that looks like. This is from a book called When Helping Hurts. And what's interesting about this is, of course, we got God at the very top of this. That represents us in the center. We have this poverty of a spiritual intimacy. So we have a broken relationship with God. And because of that, maybe we deny God's existence or authority, or just he doesn't have full reign over our life. Might be the best way to say that. And so that leads to placing other things above God, right? That's what idolatry was all about, placing other things above Yahweh God. And so maybe that's materialism, that's the tyranny of the moment. That might be any number of things. So it leads to, we've worshiped the wrong gods. We've worshiped gods and not God. And so that creates a broken relationship with ourself. So we have a poverty of being, where we get this God complex. And what I mean by that is that we think we have to solve the world's problems, or at least I have to solve my own problems. And then when I fail at it, I've got a low self-esteem. And so I think that I can't handle anything. A lot of people that I work with, that I come in contact with, because they are in a physical poverty or they are physically homeless, they're in this, their self-esteem is shot. And so that's why I talk so much about dignity, because dignity comes from knowing who you are and who God is in its proper context. This broken relationship with God, which leads to a broken relationship with self, means I can't possibly have a whole relationship with others. And so we get this poverty of community because we become self-absorbed. People don't realize, but a low self-esteem is actually a prideful thing, because I make it about me. And so it leads to self-centeredness or an exploitation or abuse of others. So taking advantage of others. I heard this saying a few years ago, and I say it often, is now I just went blank. Our intent is to love people and use things, but somehow we got it twisted, and instead we started using people and loving things. See, we exploit and we abuse others. Because we don't have this relationship with God right, and it affects ourselves and others, then all the rest of creation seems cursed, right? God said to Adam, cursed is the ground as you work it. It's going to be by the sweat of your brow. You're going to be working hard now. And so I lose my sense of purpose. And so oftentimes, you'll see people, whenever they lose their job, they feel like they've lost their entire sense of purpose. It leads to one of two extremes. It can lead to one of two extremes of being extremely lazy or being a workaholic, and neither's healthy, right? Or maybe putting things above people, like we said, and so which affects our entire system, whether that's economically or socially or politically. All of these things come into play. Any questions on that one?
I think I missed a part on the low self-esteem when you said that can be a pride issue. Can you elaborate on that or recap that again?
Yeah. When you think of the word self-esteem, what's at the root of it? Self. And so whenever we think pride, we often think of the puffed up person. We think of the one that's like, look at me, look at what I've accomplished. Look at how much money I have, or look at the car I drive, or look at my title. Look how I'm the CEO. Look how powerful I am. And most all of us would agree that that's pride. But on the other extreme, you have the person that goes, I have nothing to offer. I have nothing. And there's this low self-esteem, but at the center of that is still self. And pride is all about self. And pride is all about viewing myself through only my eyes and not through the eyes of God. So
That's so good, Daniel. Thanks so much. My goodness, that is so good. I've never even thought about it that way.
yeah.
Sorry if I cut you off. I know you
No,
had more to share. Go ahead and give it to me.
no, that's good. So it's that idea of viewing pride is viewing myself through my eyes, if you will. If I have a proper view of God, then I'm going to have a proper view of others and self. And I'm no longer going to compare myself to others. That's where we get either pride or low self-esteem, is we compare ourselves with others. But if I view myself in a proper relationship with God, then I'm going to see myself as He sees me. I'm going to recognize I'm no better than anyone else, but also I'm no worse than anyone else. I'm a sinner in need of grace. I'm a sojourner on this earth, searching for contentment and searching for something to satisfy me, and that something is God. But because of a broken relationship with God, I don't realize that's what it is. And so since I have that broken relationship with God and it causes issues with myself, I don't have it with anyone else or even with creation. I have an unhealthy view all the way around.
Can I add something to that, Daniel?
Yeah.
I think that's such a good reminder, because I think maybe at times I have that tendency to have that, low self-esteem, just experiences with failure, things like that, or maybe things not going my way. But when you were talking about that, it reminded me of two examples. I guess I'll give you. I guess one I mentioned before, but Paul having to work, for free. That could have been an example of where maybe if we're put in that same situation, that maybe we ourselves might consider ourselves, low on the totem pole, or have a lack of dignity, or have that low self-esteem,
Yes.
I guess another one would be Jesus Christ himself, who he admitted to, or told his disciples, I don't have a place to lay my head at times. That's what you're going to come into. So those could be like situations where we ourselves might have that low self-esteem. But I guess it's being reminded also that Jehovah Jireh, I think that means you're my provider, Lord.
Yeah.
If I remember that correctly, I'm not sure, but we should be.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but we should be reminded that the Lord is our provider,
Yeah.
So it's a good reminder for me, because sometimes I can lean towards that way.
Very good. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Daniel.
Yes.
Mrs. Cheryl, one thing I don't know how this ties into anything, but it's a saying that I came across somewhere, and it's profound to me. And it says, you will never look into the eyes of someone that God does not love.
Yes.
And I play that over in my head a lot of times. If I have a tendency to look down on somebody, or, why can't they get a job, or anything like that?
Yeah.
I'm not any different in regard to God's love.
That's right.
That just helps me.
That's very good.
Dealing with people.
Yeah, having that proper perspective is very important. Definitely. Poverty is a result of relationships that don't work, that are not just, that are not harmonious or enjoyable. Poverty is the absence of shalom in all its meaning. So we talked about shalom last week, that it's peace, but it goes much deeper than peace. It's a sense of wholeness. So poverty is not being whole. It's not having right relationships. It's not having right justice. It's not having compassion and mercy and humility. And so all of those things come into play whenever we are discussing poverty. So let's see how we're doing on time. We got a little time. I want to go into this story that Jesus tells about the Good Samaritan. So hopefully you're familiar with it. I'll have it on the screen in case you don't have your Bible handy, but it does come from Luke chapter 10, beginning in verse 25, and it's going to go through 37. So he says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus, and he said, "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You've answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked, "And who is my neighbor?" And in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, where he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going along down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. A priest happened to be going down the same road when he saw a man. He passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him, he bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, and he gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have." Which of these 3 would be the neighbor? What did treat him by a neighbor? And so the guy replies and says, well, the one that had mercy on him. And Jesus tells him, go and do likewise, right? So there's a few things in here. First, just from a fun standpoint, when Jesus is telling this story and he's like, a priest and a Levite, the Pharisees were probably perking up. This is what because typically what was told there in their culture is if there was a priest and a Levite, the next was always going to be the Pharisee. Like in every story, the priest, the Levite, and the Pharisee. Sounds like a bad beginning of a bad joke to us, but a priest, a Levite, and a Pharisee. And so he's like, the priest walks by and sees them and he goes to the other side. And they're like, oh. And the Levite comes and he goes to the other side. And they're thinking, all right, the Pharisee is going to be the hero of the story. And what a shock to them it must be to hear a Samaritan. Because they didn't like Samaritans. And so Jesus is dealing with the marginalized on a lot of different levels here. He's talking about a Samaritan being the hero. He's talking to a man that's beaten and left for dead, and people just walking by on the other side. So you've got this guy that's been beaten down by robbers, or maybe in our context, it's just been beaten down by life. And then you've got the priest and a Levite who are upstanding citizens, model citizens, right? Who would you respect more if you were Jewish in the early, and during this time in the early first century, than a priest or a Levite? And you're a Jew. Those are your heroes. And then he says they didn't do the right thing. It was a Samaritan, and they could not stand the Samaritan. And by him saying that this man went from Jerusalem to Jericho, he seems to be implying that the man that's left for half dead is a Jew. And his own people didn't help. But it was a Samaritan outsider, a marginalized person that came along and did what he needed to do. So I just thought that was fun. Like, I wish I was there to see the Pharisee's face whenever he said, and a Samaritan. I think that would be pretty amazing to see. But a couple things to notice in here. How he spends time with this man. He takes time to bandage the wounds, and then he travels with him. And then even says that he'll be back. There's some keys in there that are very important that I think we need to look at. So he doesn't just bandage the wounds. I mean, he could have bandaged the wounds and said, here's some money, go get you a hotel. But instead, he bandages the man's wounds and he goes with him. He journeys with him. This man had other things going on, but he takes the time, travels with him, puts him in the inn, and says, I'll be back. He's building a relationship. He's building trust. And that's significant. So whenever we're approaching the marginalized person, the one that's on the outside, whether that be a person like a homeless person, or a person in extreme poverty, or whether that just be somebody that just is different, that's on the outskirts, that's on the outside, that's marginalized, that's disenfranchised, those people that we wrote about or discussed in our discussion of who are the Ninevites of today, or the leper. If we really want to help, we'll get to know them. We'll get to know the story. Why was this man beaten? Was it because he looked like he had money and so he was robbed? Was it because he was talking smack to somebody Why was this man beaten and left for dead and robbed? Was it just a matter of being at the wrong place at the wrong time? See, we don't know any of this because we aren't the Samaritan that spent time with it. But in this, and I know it's a parable, but it's got some significance to it. It seems like Jesus is saying he spent time with him. He went out of his way to make sure that he understood the story. And then he even says he's going to make an effort to come back and to take care of any additional needs. So when I'm driving down the road and I'm seeing someone, I can either say, yeah, man, here's some food. Here's some money. Or I can sit and get to know this person. And take the time to bandage the wounds, so to speak. Bandage the wounds might not be physically bandaging a person's cuts or whatever, but it might be addressing those emotional hurts, right? You're like, you start to say, oh, you know, this reminds me of how God has helped me. And they're like, I don't want to hear that. And they tell you why. I've been hurt by church. Church people have done me wrong. They've mistreated me. And you get to bandage the wound. And you say, well, I'm here to listen. And I'm sorry somebody hurt you. And I want to make it right. That's bandaging a wound. Traveling with them, walking alongside a person. You see, typically our way of doing charity is to do something for someone instead of doing something with them, which is what's going to have the biggest impact. It's almost like whenever a person becomes a new Christian and you're like, wow, we had 4 people get baptized and give their life to God. That's awesome. And then we never talk to them again. We wouldn't do that. At least I hope we wouldn't. We want to build a relationship with them. They need somebody to walk alongside them, right? And whenever we're helping those that are in poverty, or we're helping somebody that has wounds and they're disenfranchised and they're marginalized, it's important that we not just address the wound, but that we walk with them through it. And that we follow up. He says he's going to be back. So, and we'll come back, we're going to come back to this. But there are 3 types of charity. And these are going to come into play, and you'll see why we had this story in just a minute. Relief. Relief is that urgent and that temporary provision of emergency aid to reduce the immediate suffering from a true crisis. A person in the middle of the night, their house is on fire. They have nothing, right? They've got whatever they're sleeping in, and they run outside, and everything's gone. It's a complete loss. That person needs relief. They need a place to stay right now. They need food right now. They need clothes right now. So they need relief. Those situations don't happen as often as we think they do. But they do happen. And so we've got to be ready with relief. And by the way, nearly every charity, every organization that says that they help people is based on relief. All right. And it's a provider-receiver dynamic. I have something you want, and I give it to you. And it's good and it's needed. Relief is needed. So the second one is rehabilitation. And that seeks to restore someone to the positive elements of their crisis condition. The goal is stability. So you made the insurance claims, you've finally gotten back into a place. This is the fire situation again. You've finally gotten into a house again. You have some clothing, you've got some furniture and some basic things. That's rehabilitation. The goal is stability. You're now kind of in a more stable environment. And then the final one is development. And that's an ongoing change that moves everybody involved. That's the helper and the helped to a right relationship with God, with self, with others, and the rest of creation. So that's saying, all right, the reason that your house caught fire from the report from the fire department is that you left your stove on and it overheated. So what can we do differently now? Can you and they're like, man, I just forgot. Is there a timer that you can set? Like, can you set an alarm each night before you go to bed that says, check the stove, check the toaster, there are things that we can do to say, how can we do the best we can to prevent this? Whenever it comes to our story of the Good Samaritan, he needed immediate relief. He was beaten and left for dead. The immediate relief was the guy going by and seeing him and saying, let me bandage these wounds up so they don't get infected. He needed rehabilitation. So he went and was in a stable place at the inn. But he needed development. And hopefully, that's the conversation that happened along the way. Of saying, man, so how did this happen? Where were you going? And so I think I told you the story of the man in my town that is almost a celebrity. He's a homeless guy that is almost a celebrity in our local town because everybody tries to do something for him. And they'll bring him clothes and shoes and backpacks and blankets and pillows weekly. And they give him money and they check him in the hotels. They're doing a lot of stuff for him and providing relief, not knowing that they're actually damaging him. Because if they were focusing on development, they would understand his story better. And they would understand that he has a family. And he can tell you their names, or he used to be able to. Now he's gotten hold of some bad drugs and he can't really even remember his family. But if we had gotten in that development stage, then we could have said, listen, I'm not going to give you any more relief. I've given you relief in the past. Now it's time to actually develop who you are. Because you've got a mom at home that absolutely misses you and loves you, but she can't see you in your addictive state because you get violent. You have a sister at home that wants to welcome you home, but you hurt her when you're in this state. Physically hurt her. And so I can't give you any more money because you've shown how you use it. And I can't put you in a hotel because that doesn't let you dwell in the consequence. Because sometimes we have to do that. Sometimes we have to let the consequences simmer a little bit. We have to feel the pain before we make a change. And so that's where the development is. And development's hard. And so that's why so many organizations or individuals focus on the charity, because charity is a little more easy. I'm out a few bucks, or I'm out an hour or two of my day to drive you somewhere. But we didn't really have a good conversation, or something like that. And so development is where real growth takes place. So we don't want to spend all our time here. It's needed. We need relief. There are situations where relief is needed. But the relief is to seek rehabilitation. All right, look, we've put you in this place now where you've got a little bit of stability. Now it's time to grow. Now it's time to develop. And so, what are the situations that brought us to this point? Why? Like a person calls every month with a cutoff notice for the same bill. You might need emergency relief because we don't want you to be without power or without water. You've got a family. But why do we always have a cutoff? And then we dig a little deeper and it might be, man, I get a job, but I don't have a vehicle to get me there and I have to rely on other people. And so maybe part of our development is, can we find something that's close so that you can make sure that you get to work? And it might be a lesser paying job, right? You might have to go here, but at least you know you can walk there. If I tell you I'm going to come pick you up every day, but I miss a day because I'm sick or something happens to my vehicle, and that affects you. So what can you do? Where can you go? What are some changes that you can do now that's going to better you in the future? For example, a guy comes into the mission. He finds a job. It takes him an hour to walk there and an hour back. But what he did was his first check, he bought a bicycle. And so that was his very first check, bought a bicycle. Now it takes him 30 minutes to get to work and to get back. So he's cut an entire hour out of his day now because it was taking him an hour there and an hour back. And now it's 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. He saves another check and he buys a motor to put on his bicycle because here in Oklahoma, you can put a motor on your bicycle if it's less than 50 cc's. And so he just bought a small engine and he put it on his bike. And it's like a little moped thing now. Now it takes him 15 minutes to get there. And so now he's saving up his checks because he doesn't have any bills right now because he's staying at the mission. And he's working on getting a car so that he can get a better paying job. Because there's a factory, but it's about a 15-20 minute drive, which would take and it's on a highway that you're not allowed to drive the moped on because it's not street ready for highways. And so his intention is to save up to get a car that he can afford so that then he can drive to this better paying job that's going to allow him to save money then to get into his housing. And so he's developing. But if we just said, well, we'll pay your bill every week or every month, and we haven't helped him solve the problem. And so that's that type of charity. And so that's why I wanted to get into this. And then I just realized we are at time or past time a little bit. So I apologize for that. Anybody got any final words? I tried to get too much in before spring break's what it is.
It's just so good, Daniel. I could listen to more. It's wow, a lot of things to ponder and just go over again. A lot of things I had not thought about, so from different perspectives. So I appreciate your insight.
Yeah, I agree with Annette. I was kind of thinking the same thing. Well, it's a lot to chew on and, different ways of looking at things. And anyway, it's great. Thank you.
All right.
Also,
Daniel.
Cheryl, I wrote down your saying you would never look into the eyes of a person that God doesn't love. I have to remember that. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Yeah,
You're
that's a good
welcome.
one. I appreciate the fact that you worked from walking to the bike, and now he's got his eyes set on buying the vehicle. Is those stages, I guess that we learn from, that we learn to appreciate maybe the reward that we get, our compensation or our salary, But I appreciated that you worked that and you showed the stages of this guy's improvement. So I think we can learn from that.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, I'm going to pray for us, and then I don't know. Some of you might have the next class. I don't know. So I don't want to keep you. So, Lord, thank you for your heart for us. Thank you that you see us, and that you are the great healer that heals our wounds, that not just bandages them up, but completely heals them. We thank you. Lord, will you teach us to see those around us, to see them with your eyes that love, eyes that have compassion, and eyes that look for opportunities. We thank you and we love you, and be with each of us, Lord. We pray that this next week, as we take a break, that we will come back refreshed after that and ready to learn some more. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good night, everyone. See you in 2 weeks.
Good night.
Amen. See you guys.
Yeah.